All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for one of our short and sweet webinar series. I was just trying to do a little bit of a flick through in the calendar to work out what number topic this is. And I think it must be about 5 or is it 7? Is it 6, Rose? Gosh, the year is absolutely flying by. Just a little reminder, if you haven't managed to join us for all of our short and sweet webinar series, or you missed some of our longer webinar series from last year, all of that can be found on our YouTube channel, which is Jobskin ANZ. And if you just pop that into the search bar, you'll have access to all of our previous webinar series, as well as our absolutely awesome measuring videos. I am super excited about today's topic. This is a really practical one for clinicians. It's that area that we all struggle with a little bit, that fish around the axilla. So I'm super excited for Rose to share some of those tricks of the trade. Over to you, Rose.
Thanks, Veronica. Actually, me too. This particular topic, I think, is a good example of one of the reasons why we decided to go with a short and sweet webinar series, because you'd never spend an hour on it and it wouldn't even cross your mind to bring it up as a topic if we were doing the longer webinars. But this is one of those ones that I think makes such a difference in if you can get the garment to fit right. So today, I've just got to move that mouse right out of the way so I'm not tempted to try and use it because it doesn't work on this computer. So bear with me. So today, it is going to be pretty practical in focus. So the really four topics that we're four subsections, I should say. One is, what exactly are the challenges of the axilla? Like, what is it that's going on? Then we're going to look at actually measuring correctly, because some of the problems that you experience in the fit of the axilla might be addressed just by improving how you're measuring. Then I'm going to just show you the different axilla designs, because actually you might be measuring correctly, but for whatever reason, the way that the axilla is actually constructed is not working for your patient. And then also, I just thought we might kind of finish with considering a couple of alternate garment designs that actually might provide the compression where you need it, but avoid the axilla issue altogether. All right, so let's crack on. Okay, so the challenges of the axilla, I've just used this garment here is completely irrelevant. I just wanted a mannequin with a, that I could use as our sort of dummy patient, so to speak. So the challenges of the axilla, we tend to recognise or see actually in the axilla, where, obviously where the arrow is pointing. But there are three kind of critical constructs of the body that impact the measuring that will affect the comfort in the axilla. The first two are circumferential measurements. So obviously the circumference around it's called the shoulder circumference on the form. And then there's circumference around the chest, which is, at right up at axilla level, which is called the chest circumference. And I'm going to show you in a minute the measuring video that shows you how you can make sure that this first measurement, this vertical arrow here, the shoulder circumference, is not too tight. And I can't recall, but I don't think on the measuring video we specifically state when you take the circumference around the chest, get the patient to breathe out so that they're just relaxed, sort of not breathe all the way out so that they've deflated their chest cavity, but not holding their breath right up, but they're not, we just want them in a comfortable position, because that circumference around there is also critical to the fit at the axilla. And then there's one other spot, which actually, when I did my first pass at preparing this webinar, I didn't include this, and it almost woke me up at night, and I thought, oh my gosh, we have to include this, because the third one we don't think about as part of the axilla, but it's this one here, not the waist, but how the vest anchors. Because if the anchorage is not good at the base of the vest, you'll get the vest riding up and bunching in the axilla, so it affects the comfort and the fit in the axilla. Now, I don't know. And this particular, it's actually gone on to a second slide, but I wanted to show you in this, I know this is a mannequin, but you can see how the shape of the axilla is different on the two limbs of the mannequin, and that is not dissimilar to real life patients, actually. And you know, I'm sure the majority of you all are experienced clinicians, and over time you will have identified the fact that it's not always just the fit of a garment, but when you look at different people's axilla, they differ. Some are wider, some are sort of closer. Their limbs are almost adhered close to their body, much the same as you see in the mannequin. So let's look at the measuring video and just see if you can pick up a few tips, and I'll highlight a couple.
Torso measurements are required for vests, bodysuits and sternal straps. For vests with sleeves, it's preferable to measure the arms first with the moss or purple paper tapes, marking the height of the top tape with the Jobskin body marker highlighter. All of the other measurements are taken with the Jobskin retractable tape measure, and the Jobskin body marker highlighter is also required. A helpful rule of thumb, if you're unsure, is to mark all of the circumferential measurements on the back at the time that they are taken. They will not all, in fact, be used, but this is easier than missing markings until you are familiar with the form requirements. The patient should be measured in standing. The neck circumference is taken at the mid-length point of the neck. No marking is required. The shoulder circumferences are taken individually of the left, then right shoulders, as I'll demonstrate. Ask the patient to put their hand on their hip and loop the tape measure under the axilla and up to the coracoid process. Allow the tape to ease as the patient is instructed to let their hand hang down. Record this final measurement. To take the chest measurement, ask the patient to put both hands on their hips and pass the tape measure across the back and under the arms at axillary level. Instruct the patient to hang their hands by their sides and record this eased measurement. You then need to take a series of similar circumferential measurements down the torso at the level of the nipples. Women should wear a bra for vest measuring. Below the breast, the waist, the largest point of the belly, and the end of the support. All of these levels need to be marked. Linear measurements are then taken for these markings and are taken at the back, allowing the tape measure to hang free from C7, first to the nipple line, then to just under breast, to the waist, to the largest point of the belly, and to the end of the support. 2 additional measurements are taken across the back. Imagine that a plumb line is hanging from the centre of each axilla. Measure from one plumb line to the other across the back at the axillary level, and then across the back at the waist. These are the side seam to side seam measurements. The shoulder width circumference is taken on one side only, unless there is a very marked difference, from the base of the neck to the coracoid process. For singlets or sleeveless vests, a modified version of this measurement is also required, specifying the width of the garment on the shoulder. For vests with sleeves, A measurement is required from the base of the neck over the coracoid process to the marking of the top arm tape. This enables the two measurement sets, paper tape and torso measurements, to mesh. The final measurement required, whether male or female, is just under breast to the waist on the front. Note too that the form requires a bra cup size for a female vest. This does not need to be measured, just recorded based on patient report. Some vest options or modifications may require additional measurements. A nappy strap for a small child's vest requires a measurement from waist front to waist back under the crotch with a nappy in place. And any variations to the necklines of a vest or bodysuit require drop measurements from the sternal notch at the front or C7 at the back to the desired height of the neckline. An additional measurement is required for a protuberant abdomen, which is a contour from the sternal notch to the end of the garment. If a sternal strap is required, in addition to the neck circumference and circumference under breast measurement, which are taken as just demonstrated, the following measurements are required: the circumference at the base of the sternal strap, the length drop or scoop from the sternal notch, the top of the shoulder to just under breast at the back, and the top of the shoulder to the end of the garment, also at the back. All measurements should be recorded on the form as they are taken, and then the forms completed as explained in the introductory video.
Okay, so here we go. So just a few key points from that about measuring correctly. So to get that circumferential measurement around the shoulder, well, the shoulder circumference, circumferential sounds like it's a horizontal measure. Make sure you have your patient's hands on hips with the tape measure in place, then ask them to drop their arms and allow the tape measure to slide or to ease. That actually can make a difference of about 2 centimetres in the circumference. And you can imagine if you have had a body measure taken around your shoulder circumference, and if it's 2 centimetres too small, it would really cut in and be uncomfortable. The next one, the chest measure, that one again where both hands are put on the hips, that measurement is taken right up into the axilla. And if we need to make sure that that's a correct circumference, because if you are taking it lower than that, probably more so on a man than on a woman, the circumference can be a little bit less. And then if it's fabricated to up at that height, then again, it will be too tight and restrictive. The side seam to side seam, that was one of those later measurements under the axilla on the back. Again, that is taken right up at the axilla level. And the bit where I was speaking in that video about the plumb line, if you know what a plumb line is, it's something that's used by brickies where they basically hold a weighted string so that you get a dead straight line going down. Now, a side seam on the side of a vest is not necessarily the middle of the circumference, it's the middle of the axilla going straight down. So if you've got a big tummy out the front, if you don't measure that side seam to side seam accurately, the side seam is going to angle forward and the whole fit of the garment is going to be skewed and it's going to affect the fit around the axilla. So it's the side seam to side seam under the axilla on the back, but also imagine down that plumb line, and that's where you determine the side seam to side seam at the waist. So both of those are significant. The top arm tape to the neck. So if you are putting sleeves, which obviously this is where the axilla comes into play, putting sleeves in a garment, you take the arm circumferences first, mark that top arm tape, make sure the arm is down by the side, and then go from the neck across over the top of the shoulder down to the top arm tape. This is important because this actually shows the designers how your arm circumferences fit together with the circumferences on the body. Again, if this isn't right, it can affect the fit of the axilla. Now let's talk about different axilla designs, because normally when we order a vest, we just order a vest. But I worked for a lot of years with burns patients, and patients that have burns in the chest and the axilla. One of their real trouble spots is the anterior axilla, where they can get this banded contracture across the front. So if you have a seam that cuts through like this one here, I'm hoping you can see me using the cursor on the screen, but I'm moving it on that central seam of the Irish axilla. That cuts in and it's really painful. Then on the standard, can you see that there's a gusset that's put in there? And so the seams are offloaded. Now, I can't honestly tell you that one is better than the other, but for you as the prescribing therapist, you are totally in the driving seat there. So if you've got someone who's very tender right in that central area of the axilla, the standard where the seams are offloaded is probably a better option. But if you have someone who actually you need that compression, for example, when you've got lymphedema that's extending right up to the top of the arm, you don't want to compromise the compression into the axilla. So you're better off with the Irish axilla, and we'll talk a bit more about those, where you can see the fit is right up into the axilla, whereas on the standard it kind of bridges across. They're the two main construction differences in the axilla, but there are a couple of other variations. For example, and this is very user-friendly in Australia, if you can afford to have the compression relaxed a bit, then you can ask for a mesh axilla. So if somebody is needing to wear compression on their arm and on their torso, but the axilla is not so important, put mesh in because it's cooler and kinder in Australian climate. Maybe not so much in New Zealand, but hey, there are hot days there too. Then the soft lycra is another option. It is a reduced compression over that compression panel, but it's like it's more like bather's material. That it's a very soft, silky, satiny, slidey lycra, so it feels really good. Now you can actually still have a power net axilla like the standard here, and you can ask for soft lycra lining, which keeps the compression but just makes it a little bit softer to touch. The Irish axilla I'm going to come back to. I'm just going to talk about the open axilla. If the mesh for some reason is not suitable, you do have the option for an open axilla. I would discourage that in all but the really trickiest of circumstances, because you will get a greater loss of compression because there isn't fabric holding it all together. Now let's talk a bit about the Irish axilla. It's not that Irish have particularly differently constructed shoulders and axillae. This was developed way back when in the Jobskin factory that at that time was in Ireland. Hence, it's called the Irish axilla. And the one that you can see on the screen there is in its kind of, you could say, its most complex form. But what's significant about it is that seam that shapes the way the arm connects to the torso goes straight through the axilla, whereas the standard, as I said before, the seams are offloaded towards the arm and towards the torso. But there are a couple of other variations of the Irish axilla. You don't have to request this in any way, shape or form. You can just ask for the Irish axilla and explain what it is that you need. I'm just going to flick back a sec. Can you see that we have this in all of the zips? We don't stitch the arms on the way that a shirt is stitched on with sort of a vertical seam. We use what, for anyone who sews, it's called a raglan seam, where the seam goes directly across on the diagonal. Now these two vests are made with a variation of the Irish axilla, and I would say for my part as a clinician, when I order, I would never specify to the designers, oh, I really want the Irish Axilla with the little gusset underneath or the gusset over the top. What I would ask for is an Irish Axilla. So that means there isn't the gusset that goes across the actual axilla, but the seam is what goes through the centre of the axilla. I hope that's making sense. I feel like I'm sort of potentially stating something in a couple of different ways. But that is essentially the difference. And the way that these two have been constructed, of course, you can't tell because both these vests are on mannequins, but the designers will make those choices based on the overall proportion of the patient as to whether they have that gusset below or whether they don't. And you can see that this one on the right has got seaming down a side seam on there, whereas the one on the left does not. So sometimes it's whether you need seams moved or changed. Now, I just thought I would mention a couple of alternate garment designs, because sometimes the issue you're needing to put you're thinking you need to put someone into a vest because of the nature of their scarring or edema of the location. There's just two other things that I'm really putting it out there for you to consider as an alternative, and they may be, depending on your situation, they may be entirely inappropriate, but if you sort of know that those two garment designs are in your arsenal, then you have those opportunities. Now, I apologise for the quality of this particular picture, but this was taken on a phone at the recent lipedema conference, and this is what's called a bolero. So 2 arm sleeves. It can be too long, or it could be a long and a short, that are linked across the back by a strip of fabric. And so if you have got something where you need some compression just over the deltoid, and therefore you think, well, I need something up there, so I'm going to have to go into a full vest, maybe not. Okay. Now, the one thing I would say is with boleros, probably the one potential pitfall, again, is compression under the axilla. So it's really important that you get that eased measurement in the vertical shoulder circumference so that it doesn't cut in under there. But it's quite a good way of stabilising a arm sleeve if you need it to go a little bit higher than the top arm tape. The other garment design is a modified vest. This is called the Adonis vest, and you can see it can be varying heights of neckline, but you can see that you get compression across the deltoid, you get compression across along the front across the décolletage, but there is this opening here on the vest is to allow freedom of movement without affecting the anchorage. Now, if you need compression on the chest wall, this is not an option, but if it's actually compression that you want across the décolletage, the deltoid, down onto the arms, it's worth considering this, because when your patient lifts up their arm, that kind of opening in the garment takes all the movement, and the bottom of the Adonis garment just stays anchored right where it is, particularly with silicone-backed elastic. This is particularly useful for children, and you know, a good option for anybody active or tradies and that kind of thing. So just one last word before we wrap up, and see if there's any questions. If you're thinking of any questions, feel free to just pop them in the group chat and Veronica will filter them through. The anchorage is important, like every garment, and you hear this coming up in topic after topic, but just make sure you never finish a vest at the widest point of a torso, like over a pot tummy. You need to go either way above it, say just under the breasts or under the pecs, or go below it. You always try to finish a garment at a narrower point, otherwise it's going to slide. Doesn't matter what you do unless you have got straps to anchor it down or up, depending on what garment you're talking about. So this is kind of a novel way of working with anchorage that may also ultimately affect the comfort in the axilla. All right, just very quickly, we always end the webinars with this. If you're not familiar with Jobskin, if you haven't used them before, if you're using, in order to order, you use the appropriate measuring form plus the cover sheet order form. Photos are always helpful. Email customer service at jobskin.com, or their phone numbers there on the screen. But also, again, I would refer you to the Jobskin website. There's lots of resources there. The measuring videos. There's also the YouTube channel that Veronica mentioned. Veronica and I are available probably most readily on email, and the design team are always up for a challenge. So you can email them at thedesigners@jobskin.com or call them on that number 9915 8010. Thanks for your time. If you've got any questions, we've got a minute or two.
It's a great topic, Rose.
Either stunned you or bamboozled you, one or the other. So yeah, thanks for joining us. And if you think of questions after the fact, then you can just email them through. Over to you, Veronica.
Cool. So just a very big thank you to you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and you know, as Rose said, reach out anytime. You guys have a good afternoon.
Bye then.